Hi peeps. So for today's installment of Tarot and Witchcraft, we're going to be talking about working with our altars and the cycle of working with the Sabbats when it comes to our altars. So as I'm recording this, it's the day before the summer solstice, and this is one of those Sabbats that I'm often really, I don't know, I either have one or two experiences with this Sabbat. I'm either like really invigorated and I feel super creative and inspired, or I'm kind of having the exact opposite experience. But this year in 2022, I'm definitely feeling really creatively inspired when it comes to this Sabbat. And so last night I began the process of energetically kind of clearing and resetting my altar in order to have it fully set up for the Sabbat itself tomorrow. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about what goes into that process personally for me, because I know I get asked all the time about my altars. I do tend to share a little bit when it feels right for me to on Instagram in various photos and videos, just kind of my practice with my altars. And so I thought today would be a nice day to talk about this because it's on my mind. So altars are really beautiful ways in which we can honor sacred space for ourselves and our connection either to deity, to our spiritual path, to higher self, or an expression of ourself, or our journey, or an aspect of deity that we want to honor through any given time. So I think there's this beautiful, very artistic, creative, and magical energy that goes into an altar itself. For anyone who considers themselves a witch or follows a left-hand path or is following a spirituality that's perhaps alternative to mainstream paths. And I think you should really, at the beginning of your personal spiritual journey in regards to witchcraft, paganism, left-hand path, sit with what the altar means for you. So there are some people who kind of line up with my view, which is that the altar is very much a personal expression of my spiritual path and where I am on that path at any given time. It's also a way in which I express honor and reverence for my ancestors, for the deity that I work with, and for my spirit guides and spirit animals. And I tend to prefer a really eclectic, kind of messy looking altar with lots of things that are found in nature as opposed to purchased. That's just a preference for myself. Please don't feel that by me saying that, that means that you need to, step into something similar in regards to your own altar work. All I'm sharing are just things that have worked for me over the years when it comes to clearing and building altars in this video. I do love the idea of letting an altar rest before you rebuild. So I love the taking down and honoring of a time and a cycle, especially in regards to a Sabbat, giving a night of rest, because I am a witch who loves nighttime and loves to honor the magic that happens in the dark, and then to rebuild as you approach and engage with a new energy. So I would encourage you to sit with when you feel it's time to take down the altar. So I always say that like my altar has a hum. There's a specific hum for each season and Sabbat and time period that I'm working with my altar. And when the hum starts to quiet down is when I know that I'm about to step into a shift with my altar. And it's time to take down the workings and allow for a period of rest, and then allow for a rebuild to happen. So I would encourage you to sit with like when you feel like a time period, or when you have a knowing that a time period has come to pass and that the current working altar you have set up isn't any longer quite in alignment with the energy that you're experiencing in your life on your path at this point in time. That to me is always a sign that it's time to take it down, allow there to be a reset, and then rebuild. Another time that I will find this happen is if I start connecting to a new deity really strongly. And then it really does become about building an altar space that's completely in alignment with that deity, that face of deity, that animal that's coming through, that element that's wanting to be expressed. And so that's another time that I might take down an altar and rebuild. Also, when significant things happen in my personal life, I will take down an altar and rebuild. So when it comes to you sitting with for yourself, when is it time to change up my altar? I would say really pay attention to when you feel that there is a shift or you experience a shift for yourself, either in regards to your spiritual path or your earth path or some combination thereof, and kind of allowing for an honoring of that to happen through the altar. Because remember, the altar is the physical representation of your craft and of your practice. So it's something that's very unique unto you. It shouldn't be something you feel like you have to do a certain way. At least I very strongly feel that way. It should instead be something that is an expression. It's an honoring, and it's also where you are going to store your tools that you're working with for that season. So many people who identify as witches or who identify as pagan work with the Sabbats, and they're a beautiful energy to get comfortable in, like building your altar around. And also what you put on the altar can help you define how you're going to experience the energy of that Sabbat. And you will find that there are Sabbats that it's really easy to connect to, where you really feel in your power. You'll also find that there are Sabbats where it's murkier and you don't feel quite as empowered. And so your way into understanding the goddess's energy through that Sabbat requires an open mind. And that might be a time when your altar feels darker, looks darker, or is in some way not your typical go-to expression of your spiritual path, right? So when it comes to building the altar, I think it's really important that it be very much in alignment with your path, your deity, and the energy of the season, the Sabbath, the element, whatever it is that you're calling forward. I like that overnight period to also sit with feeling for my sacred tools that are in my home in general, and then feeling for what wants to be on the altar. You know, what wants to show up for decks that want to be worked with? What wants to show up for those sacred tools, you know, those shells from that beach that I went to that day, or those stones that came home because it felt appropriate for them to. Are those the beings that want to be out on the altar? I will always give myself that grace period to listen and to make sure. And then how I build my altar is very intuitive. It usually takes, it's usually a process of at least a couple hours. I put some music on, I light some incense, I kind of walk around, I sit and feel what feels right, what doesn't feel right. To me, the center altar in my living space downstairs with my son and I is very much a representation of our path as a whole, of the deity that I work with, but also it is like the hearth of our home. So I'm always feeling for that energy. So as you're building your altars, sit with what feels like it needs to be or wants to be represented there. If you feel stuck around this, if this doesn't feel easy for you, I would say start with the element. Start with an element you feel really drawn to in alignment with your Sabbat, and then put representations of that on the altar. Take a step back, see how that feels. Does it now feel appropriate to add something else? Because you put that shell that represents the water element, do you now feel called to put the Oracle of the Mermaids deck on the altar? And when you put that down, does that mean that you, I don't know, remember some spice that you have in your cabinet that you put in a small vessel that you kind of relate to passion, because the water and the mermaid energy makes you think about passion, and then that brings you to the fire element. Is there something you want to bring in that's red, right? So just kind of play with it like that. For those of you who have asked me to talk about this, I just wanted to share that. Like, don't allow it to be intuitive and kind of flow. And I find that what's best to do that for myself is to put on music, to have sat with the energy overnight, and to really feel into how the altar wants to be expressed. Now, sometimes I like an altar with almost nothing on it. Sometimes I like a very full altar. Again, really trust your intuition with this piece. But remember, when you're working with the Sabbats as well, that what's on that altar is a representation of the energy of the goddess on that Sabbat and her journey. And also it's representative of that cycle seasonally. So for instance, as we're approaching the midsummer solstice, you know, I'm looking at the element of fire and passion and sensuality and sexuality. And so for me, that's like bringing in the Magdalene, calling that energy in, working with representations of my passion, of what I consider to be the union of spirituality and sexuality, and the abandon and joy, the fullness of the experience of union, right? There's also the energy of starting to think about the dark ahead, the darker seasons ahead. And so what do I want to hold close to my heart as I'm working with that energy as well, right? So sit with the energy of the Sabbat as you're sitting with what you want represented on the altar. Now, if you are more of a strict observing witch, there are going to be certain sacred tools that you do need on your altar in order to perform Sabbath rituals. So thinking about that and ensuring that that's on your altar can be a part of your process as well. The tarot and oracle decks that I have on my altar are very important because I tend to work with them every day in my daily draws throughout the season that I have that altar going. And so I will really sit with as well, before I even put anything on the altar, when I reset, I will sit with what decks want to be used every day. And there's typically one given tarot deck, one given oracle deck, tarot of vampires on my altar. Sometimes there will be other decks that kind of hang out for a little while and then go away. But I typically always have 3 set decks on the altar itself. I also want to talk about resetting when it comes to your altar. This is something that in one of the videos I made last week, I believe it was, there seems to be a lot of this like push in the New Age community that like you shouldn't need to clear, you shouldn't need to cleanse, you shouldn't need to protect. And I really, honestly, this is a personal opinion, but I really disagree with that. So the reset is the time for your altar to lay fallow. It's not working. There's no hum. So what I will do is take down the altar. So take everything off of the altar, put everything in their boxes or on their shelves, make sure that the tools are honored while they're going on vacation mode, as you know I like to say, guys. And then I will sage the altar and I will light chosen incense for that season and have that out on the altar and let the incense burn down, let the sage smoke, and let the altar reset with nothing on it. This is setting a clear delineation energetically that I'm leaving a season or a Sabbath or an experience behind. And I'm the altar is literally in the death card energy. We're done. We're not inhaling, we're not exhaling. We're in the liminal. And then it allows for, after that night cycle, me to really be able to allow the hum to build again, but we're working with a new energy. So that reset in the middle is an essential part of the process to me as a witch. It's the most important thing I can say to you when it comes to expressing tips and tricks to having a great altar. One that really feels authentic to yourself as opposed to Instagram worthy or whatever, TikTok or social media worthy, right? So you really want it to be very authentic, which means that we need the death cycle. We need there to be a period of time where that altar gets to rest. That allows it to do its best work when we approach the next energy. So the number one thing I would say in this video for you to sit with is, how do you want to clear your altar? There are so many different options. And as I just said, my favorite option is a night with nothing on it, except for sage and incense that I've allowed to burn down. And that's it. And then the tools come back in the next morning. But that reset is very, very much an essential part of the process. And just finally, as I finish up this video for you guys, I would encourage you to think outside the box when it comes to what you put on your altar. Personally, for myself, found items in nature, gifted items from nature, from people that I love dearly. All of those things are what I prefer to have on my altar over very expensive crystals or 15 statues of various deity. But you need to figure out for yourself what feels most authentic for you. So sit with what feels really good when it's on the altar, as opposed to what gives you a nothing feeling. So if you get a nothing from something or an icky feeling, it's probably not going to be the most authentic representation on your working altar at that time. Go for what feels authentic, go for what feels real. Please know that you don't have to invest hundreds or thousands of dollars in all of these various ritual items to have on your altar. I found that the things that you're supposed to work with when it comes to from a monetary value will come to you at the right time. And things that are found in nature will also come to you at the appropriate time. So sitting in front of your altar one night in meditation and just saying that you're open to receiving those tools is going to allow them to come to you in an appropriate way and in a way that's going to feel really authentic. Like that tool, that athame that you're gifted or that you waited until you found the one that felt right is going to be much more effective than something that you bought because it was the popular thing everybody was talking about that month. So try to bring some Knight of Pentacles energy to purchasing for the altar, and also trusting that what's coming to you is what's meant to be used in the space as well. But I hope you find some of these opinions, thoughts, ideas of mine on altars helpful. I have just been feeling so inspired when it comes to my rebuild of my altar today. And so I just wanted to share that energy with all of you. I hope you are all doing well out there in the world. I am, as always, sending you so much love and many blessings, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.